Good morning and welcome to our session, the Israeli Democracy Forum. We want to begin because we only have about an hour. This brings together leading thinkers and voices in governance, law, and civil society, chaired by Aylanna and Maisel, and moderated by myself. Please welcome our speakers, Douglas Alphabet, Ron Baratz, Ruthie Bloom, unfortunately Aviad Cohen is not here, Yossi Hollander, Shai Kala
He's here somewhere.
here but not here, and Dr. Galita. So without further ado, I'm going to ask Aylanna to outline what this panel is all about, and then we'll hear from all our speakers.
Thank you very much, Steve. And welcome to everyone. Thank you. Louder. Okay. We're good? Welcome to everybody who's joined us today, and to the panel participants. I'd like to thank JNS for putting together this important forum on the issue of Israeli democracy, which this week, of course, hits in a very unique way, right? We're before Yom HaZikaron and Yom HaAtzmaut. I'll just say before I begin that what I say today, which is meant to open really a whole series of issues for the panel, and they can take it whatever direction they like, is my opinion alone and not that of my organization, which is the Israel Law and Liberty Forum. So, over the past 4 decades, Israel has transformed from parliamentary democracy to the world's foremost juristocracy, with the boldness and speed of judicial imperialism increasing wildly within the past decade. This existential challenge to democratic self-governance has both given voice to and deepened chasmic tribal divisions within Israel, both between secular and religious, right and left, Mizrahi and Ashkenazi, rich and poor. It has removed the capacity for compromise by elevating the court to the deciding voice in nearly any conflict, and it has lessened the responsibility and the accountability of lawmakers who become a way station on the route to a court decision. Where the rule of lawyers has displaced the rule of law, there is only rule. Now, one could go on and on about the concrete damage caused by judicial intervention in the business sector and national security, in affairs of religion and state, and I expect and hope that some of the panelists will do so. But what interests me most is that desperately necessary reform take place at all, and I believe that judicial reformers can move forward most productively if they learn a central lesson from previous attempts. That lesson relates to leadership and to vision. We hear every day about clashes between the elected rung and the deep state. The right talks constantly of barriers to governing and of a desire to give a voice to the nation politically. But when this country was restored after an eon under colonial rule, the right was informed by the vision of Jabotinsky, who spoke the language of individual liberty alongside that of national sovereignty. Such language today could elevate the debate on Israeli law and governance from one that is too mired in personality and in power to one about ideas, identity, and shared desires for the future of this country. Reclaiming the mantle of liberty, whose through line runs from the Exodus from Egypt to the foundational ideas of the West and back through to the founding of the modern Jewish state, is essential to the project of creating a stronger, safer, more cohesive and flourishing Israel for all of its citizens. Now, I understand why this discourse has suffered in recent decades. First, the complexities of reaching consensus on any major issue have haunted the parliament since the founding of the state. Second, classical political thought is only partially studied in the Israeli Academy, whose affinity rests with the American and European left. And third, and most importantly, the rights and liberty discourse in Israel has been co-opted and abused in the name of democracy by the leading aristocratic class, undermining the very legitimacy of this language, almost in the same way that the UN has made a mockery out of international law. So many on the right feel that using a language which is defined and redefined in opposite directions by partisans is simply a trap in which their values and their interests will never be justly represented. However, it is the right's responsibility and it's imperative to speak this language again at the level of culture and politics, to embrace and reinfuse ideas such as democracy, the rule of law, and individual liberty with content befitting a Jewish and Zionist vision. They can appeal to the majority of the Israeli right, to those in the center, and even to those, some of them, on the left. This language is vital to inspiring and to restoring public trust in state institutions, including the Knesset, where even the largest party cannot carry more than a third of the country's votes, and most carry much less. It's also important to use this language to rebut the charge that legal reform is simply about a fight for power. It is in fact about how the nation shapes its destiny on every given issue, and that is precisely the field that the reformers are leaving open and undefined. So articulating this vision is essential, and it necessarily must include the contributions of many people worthier than I, such as this panel. I don't discount the importance of urgent reform, but stress that it must be rooted and talked about in terms that touch the heart in the most meaningful and most positive ways. As Israel enters its 77th year, let us restore the right's intellectual heritage and set forth that vision rooted in Jewish nationalism, in traditionalism, in classical liberal principles, and include the desire not just for judicial restraint, but for limited government that protects and strengthens individual liberty, while also emphasizing the duties that we have to each other and to the state as members of the Jewish nation that it seeks to preserve. I look forward to your remarks.
Thank you, Aylanna. So now we know about the ballpark. Let's start. I'll give each of our panelists about 3 minutes to make their opening statements, and then we'll open it up for a discussion. So, Aran Baratz, let's start with you.
Should I go up?
We'll start with you, and then we'll go back to Doug later. Feel free to go up or sit down as you like. How would you, in the light of what Aylanna just said, describe the state of Israeli democracy today, and especially the state of the legal reform?
Okay, thank you, Aylanna. I would say that there are, if I look at the landscape of Western democracies today, I think I can outline the first point. I want to make 3 points. The first point is that all Western democracies suffer from a sort of bureaucratic judicial power grab, or the overtaking of what we usually think are powers invested in elected officials, and they take it under different pretexts. Everywhere it's a little bit different, but if you look at the European Union states, for example, the sort of legal judicial federalism that they've created is completely at the expense of the state powers, right? So if you live in a state and you elect a government, when the government wants to do something, they find out that they're actually completely bound to EU courts, to EU rule, to EU bureaucracy. But the same thing has also happened in the United States. Similar things happen in Canada. And unfortunately, and this is the second point, they learn very much from Israel when they do all that. But before that, another point, the general point, because if we see a problem that's so prevalent, right, if it happens everywhere, then you have to look for some source, some flaw, actually, in our democratic theory. And I point to a sort of a Hamiltonian mistake. Alexander Hamilton is the one who set the stage by saying the judicial is the least dangerous branch because it has no active powers, it's completely passive. It has no executive powers, it has no legislative powers, and therefore our democratic theories must be assigned in defending the courts from the executive, from the parliaments. And it turns out that it's not true. Over time, courts accumulated a lot of powers. Some of them are executive, some of them are legislative. And now we have to rethink our democratic theory and rethink our separation of powers and balance of powers of the different branches of government, because obviously something we miscalculated. We took some wrong turn. So this is the general point, and we see it all over the West. Regarding Israel, so we were the first to really pick up on that Hamiltonian mistake. It happened in 1995, so it's been some time, in what Aharon Barak called the Constitutional Revolution. Israel was the first country, the first democracy to go through a constitutional revolution without any one of the people being involved. in it, right? This was a completely judicial thing. The pretext are the two basic laws that passed in 1992, but if you go back to the records in the parliament, the ones who legislated those 1992 laws, basic laws, said this is not a constitutional revolution. We are not doing anything drastic. And then three years later, Alan Barak, in a famous ruling, said this is a constitutional revolution. And actually, Dan Meridor was the justice minister at the time. When he spoke to the Knesset, he said this is not a constitutional revolution. And a month after the two basic laws were legislated, he spoke in a new judge's nomination ceremony, and he said this is a constitutional revolution. So it didn't take much. So we were the first. And now for the third point. We weren't only the first, we have also gone the furthest, to the extreme of this bureaucratic judicial coup. I call it the judicial has actually absorbed the bureaucratic branch of government. So we have the fourth branch of government, which is the bureaucracy, and the judicial power, and they overtake legislative and executive powers. So what happened in Israel, and this is a warning sign for all Western democracies, it turned out during the judicial reform that government institutions who are subordinated by law to the executive, and for all the heads of all those institutions who need to enforce the law and protect Israel. This is the part of the justice system and part of the defense mechanism of Israel. Have all declared, they swore their allegiance to the court. And the context was, we say in Hebrew, nivtzarut of the prime minister, the incapacitation of the prime minister. And they all said, if the court would say that the prime minister of Israel should be incapacitated without any regard to his physical condition or mental condition, just because in their view he should be incapacitated, then they, the head of the IDF, the head of the Shabak, the head of the police, they would carry out the court order, which is completely illegal. So this was the height, and the furthest any country has gone through this judicial bureaucratic coup, and we are now in a state, in political science this is called a failed state, because the separation of powers is unclear, and we live in a sort of anarchy. We play the game as if we have an executive branch and a parliament, but actually it's a sort of anarchical state, which makes Israel a failed state. So I finish with hoping that just as we were the first ones and the one who went furthest, we will also be the first one to show how we get out of this mess. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for a great opening. And Yossi Hollander, this resonates with what we were discussing before the panel, how you see things, how you see Israeli democracy from an international perspective. Feel free to stay seated or get up as you please.
So I'll stay on the high level. What's happening here is indeed part of the worldwide war between the 20% and the 80%. So we've been living in a world for the last 40 years. Anybody who was smart enough or had other tools to advance themselves during using globalization made it, okay? You look at the Israeli high tech, okay? It used the globalization to expand and succeed. And that is something that happened everywhere around the world, and they left the 80% behind. And that fight to keep power is between the 80% that kind of were left behind and the 20% is played itself everywhere. So the instrument of control in the UK, for example, is the House of Lords, right? It's a veto of a few people on the legislation. I mean, what kind of a democracy is that? And then, but what happened? There was Brexit. That was the 80% pulling out. Okay. Obama was also supposed to be the 80%, representing the 80%. He didn't, and that came Trump. So what we're viewing is very much happening everywhere. Basically, the 80% are trying to rise and say, wait a second, the system that you created where you move factories to China, where you are taking care of yourself or whatever ideas there are, is not working for us. We want it changed. And the elite in the world using whatever instruments they can to block it. In Israel, specifically, the Supreme Court is one of the supreme elements. It's not the only one, but it's one of the supreme mechanisms of control. And it is overused, its authority, by any measure, okay? If you think about it, I don't think there's a single court in the world that would have taken the Ronen Bar case even for review. It's not even a question, the basic function of government. Under any government and any constitution, the number one function is security. The courts stay out of it, almost everywhere. The Supreme Court has been involved with security for a very long time with very many rulings. But to that extent, like they're doing today, even reviewing it, okay, which has no basis, does not exist anywhere. Usually, in a world when somebody overused their power, there's a counter-reaction, and there is a counter-reaction. We call it judicial reform, which I think is not necessarily all concentrating specifically on the right thing, but we will see a very, very strong reaction. And I'm not 100% sure that if the Supreme Court made a decision that what the heads of whoever declared what they declared will actually have any following among the people who work underneath them. I don't expect the majority of the soldiers to obey it, for example. So that is kind of where I believe the danger is, and I believe they are not aware of the danger. They still think they are in control.
Thank you. That's a great opening, and we'll talk about it later. Shai Kala, as a former fighter pilot, I'd be particularly interested to know, and I'm sure so would our audience, how you see the state of Israeli democracy more than 18 months now into this war, the worst war we've ever had in Israel, and your recommendations from where you're sitting. I once read that you wrote, the struggle we face now is between the Jewish state and the state for the Jews.
Exactly. Thank you so much. Would you let me stand there?
Sure. No, as you like, whichever you feel comfortable.
Thank you so much. I think it's better. Sorry for leaving. I was searching for democracy. It seems like it has left the country. Okay. So how much time do we have?
3 or 4 minutes.
10 minutes? That's great. So you call this panel democracy, and actually there is no democracy in Israel. There is a dictatorship. Of course, I call it in Hebrew pkidokratia, which in a very, I would call it maybe bureaucracy or bureaucracy, okay, something like that. There is a very, very tiny minority elite here in Israel who actually controls the foundations, control the systems in Israel, who carries a mindset of a majority upon the true majority, the actual majority, which ironically and unfortunately carries a mindset of a minority. But in order to answer your question, sir, we need to first understand the foundations of the deep state in Israel, because here it is far more severe than the United States. Our state actually was born as a dictatorship. I mean, with tendencies of a dictatorship, with the Red Book, the nomenclature system of Mapai, if you have heard of, and the whole struggle of hegemony in Israel is very, very critical. It's critical to understand the today's deep state in Israel. So the first pioneers, the pioneers of the second Aliyah to Israel. How do you say Aliyah in English? But anyway, the pioneers of the second Aliyah actually founded the institutions in Israel. And the first, it wasn't an army yet, but the first actually group who dared to have guns and rifles after 2,000 years of diaspora were Bar Giora, which is a very, very tiny, very, very small organization, evolved to the Ashomer and then to the Haganah. And after Herzl's death in 1904, the struggle of hegemony has begun in Israel. So the Irgun Hashomer, with the Turks, actually invaded to Zichron Yaakov, the settlement, in order to expose the Nili underground. And after a decade and a half, the Alozera affairs, and then the murder in Aylanna, and the period of time of the Saison, where actually Jews were executed by the British, and Yedidia Segel was murdered by the Haganah. This was a struggle upon the hegemony in Israel. I was born in a kibbutz Ginosar. It's a kibbutz settled on the western shore of the Sea of Galilee, and it was founded by Yigal Allon. Yigal Allon was the high commander of the War of Independence. And the old servalite was absolutely a servalite. For example, in the Six-Day War, there were 789 casualties, soldiers who devoted their lives. 25% of them were kibbutz members. Even though the kibbutzim then were not more than 3% of the population. So we need to, to understand that alongside this, I would say, servalite, a consciousness of entitlement, I would say a mindset of dominance, more than that, of supremacy, developed during the years in this old and servalite. And the upheaval of 1977, they realized that they cannot formally control anymore. And then three main principles took place. One, just for your information, the New Israel Fund established just 1 year and a half after the upheaval of 1977. And they founded by more than $1 billion, more than 800 organizations, NGOs, in order to subtitle the research and the political leadership in fact. Second is the Bagatz. The Bagatz actually is the high court dominance of Israel with its own four doctrines, and the pkidocratia, the bureaucracy, unelected officials who control the Shin Bet, the Mossad, the army, the academia, the media. Should I continue? This is how it goes in Israel. So, for conclusion, if we do understand that the whole struggle begins dating back to 1904 with the conception, a mindset of supremacy, a mindset of dominance, the only solution, it's not just a technical one. It's not like in the United States. We need to change, to bring a wind of change to the public. First stage, to be aware to the deep state. 2 years ago, no one in Israel knew about the deep state. Today, we're about to reach this next stage. The next stage is to develop a self-confidence, which actually will help to the leadership, to the political leadership, to fulfill their goals, their mission. They had started to take care of insubordination in the army and to hire and fire the Attorney General, Bezrat Hashem, and the Shin Bet head, and Bezrat Hashem, a lot of work to do. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Shai. One thing I admire most about my colleague Ruthie Bloom, besides the fact that she's always interesting, is she always knows how to get to the crux of the matter. And so I'd like to know, Ruthie, how you see this matter.
Okay, wait, is this on? Yes, it's on, right? Okay, so I think I'd like to start with my conclusion, and that is, as someone, as a member of the right, and as a writer, I have a dilemma about this entire issue of the Israeli deep state. And it's not a dilemma over the existence of the deep state, which is clear, and in the writings of all my esteemed colleagues who also understand the judicial system far better than I do, though I did protest among those in favor of judicial reform. But as a writer and as someone who writes in English and it goes abroad, I find myself in a dilemma about calling Israel not a democracy, because this was one of the issues during the judicial reform protests before October 7th. The whole slogan was, Israel is going to be a dictatorship. Bibi Netanyahu is a dictator. We're going to end up being like Iran or like this and that. And there was a constant pounding on us about how Israeli democracy is dying. Okay, so then October 7th happened and everyone went to war and everything happened, it overtook that. And then, of course, the deep state basically quashed the entire judicial reform, even the most minor of the reforms, but we were busy fighting a war. But now my side is justifiably, by the way, battling this terrible unelected officials ruling. We had what they call the most right-wing government in Israel's history, and it can't do anything because of the courts and everything else. But I am very uncomfortable with this constant shouting that we are not a democracy. And I find myself unable to write that. Because even though the intentions of my colleagues here, all of whom I admire and agree with on every point, I think they don't hear how it sounds outside. And though what they mean is that the Supreme Court is not democratic, it comes off as Israel is not a democracy, and that makes me uncomfortable. And I just will say one thing. In 1977, I came to Israel 2 months after Menachem Begin came to power. I didn't know anything. I was a teenager. I didn't know really a lot, okay? Just knew pro-Israel, anti-Israel. And I got to Israel, and there were huge, huge fights on the Hebrew University campus. It was just like now, the left and the right, but also because it was the first time that the left, the socialists, had been defeated, it was a huge deal. And the reason I'm mentioning that date is I remember then that people on the right were saying that Menachem Begin is making a big mistake by not replacing all the civil servants with people on our sides, because he was too nice or too, whatever. And from that time on, no matter who's in power, we still don't really change the civil servants. And I can tell you that even having worked in the Prime Minister's office, the office is filled with leftists, and just so you should know, who have worked there 20 years, et cetera. But the reason I bring that up is that even today, when we sent a representative judge to The Hague, to the court at The Hague, who did we send? Who did Prime Minister Netanyahu choose to send? Our own Barak, the person responsible for the constitutional revolution. And the idea was, that's very clever. You see, we'll send the person we've been demonstrating against just to show the world that we have a diversity of opinions. Well, that didn't work out very well, did it? Because he didn't even vote on our behalf. Twice he voted against us. So I'm going to end with that.
Well, it's certainly it's a good end to open the discussion a bit later. But Douglas, I'm going to go to you now. And I know that before I'm going to ask you the question, which is, how does democracy fit in with Zionism and with sovereignty? You would like to say something about JNS.
Sure. And I'm going to stand up. Follow. I think, ladies and gentlemen, I think we could take a step back and regard this conference for the amazing event that it is. This is nothing short. You have all been invited to JNS's bar mitzvah. This is its coming of age party. And it's, you know, I, like many of my colleagues, like many of you here, have been a follower, a contributor, a fan, a supporter of JNS over the years. It's very gratifying to see its ascension, its growth, and taking its place as a very, very important element in the nurturing and sustaining of our democracy. So, Maisel Tov to JNS, keep going and keep growing. As far as the topic at hand, I freely admit that a lot of my perspective is filtered through the fact that I now have 12 years of tenure as the chairman of the board of Im Tirtzu, which is grown to be, thank you, grown to be Israel's largest, and I would humbly submit, most impactful grassroots Zionist organization, and an important voice for what I would call Middle Israel, regular people, the silent majority. And so from my bottom-up, on-the-ground perspective, here's what I see. And it's a bit of a, perhaps a contrast or a perspective somewhat different from what my colleagues have talked about. I see an extremely strong citizenry. We are blessed with a citizenry in this country that really, they are not the deplorables, they get it. And despite the amazing political divisions that we have in our country, underneath that, I believe that there is a surprising consensus. I think that there is an overwhelming majority of people who continue to favor Israel being a Jewish and a democratic state. Now, that's often a conflict of visions, a conflict of a prism that isn't necessarily, that coalesce together too well, but I think our citizens wear the ambiguity of it quite comfortably. Things have changed since the October 7th war. We've seen amazing resilience on our citizens' part. Many of you probably have been part of ad hoc relief efforts. In my town up in the Upper Galil, there were hundreds of people coming together to make sandwiches for soldiers literally every day. And the amazing thing that we have seen in our nation's campuses has been the increased intolerance of the demonization of Israel from within. I would tell you, and some of you may be surprised to hear this, that many soldiers coming back, taking off their uniforms, coming back from the battlefield, entering the university classrooms, have been accosted with accusations of committing war crimes, defending a colonialist power, and having to hear blatant support for Hamas. Now, the good news is that the reaction to that has been very grassroots. It's come from students. It's come fiercely and unambiguously. We do not want these people in our presence. And many times there have been a number of occasions where I've heard where students have forced universities to expel students, to expel faculty members who have been expressing support for Hamas. Ironically, I think that the greater hysteria that we are hearing in left-wing political discourse, you know, the coup d'etat, the end of democracy, the calls for civil war, to hit the barricades, these are signs of desperation. I think these are signs of desperation because the left is not resonating with our people. They are not convincing our people of the importance of what their messaging is. Rather, our people are saying, look, we have critical messages, we have critical missions to accomplish right now. We need to dismember Hamas. We need to neuter Iran. We need to free our hostages. We want our leadership to be focused on that. Let me close by saying that as I look through my experience working with young people I am optimistic about the future of our country. With all of the problems that we have, and they are very real problems and they're very serious problems, but I am optimistic because I believe that our upcoming generations are incredibly mature, smart, committed, passionate, and love this country. Here's my proof text for that, and that is our amazing and incredible, unique birth rate. Israel's birth rate does not come from nowhere. Having a child is the ultimate vote of confidence in the future, and our young people are voting for a brighter future even than theirs for the children, the many, many children that they are having, and please God, that will continue. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Doug. And Dr. Gadi Taub, we're so honored to have you on this panel. I've left you, obviously, last but not least.
You also put me on the far right of the panel. I'm comfortable here. That's fine.
That's a good point. So, are you too an optimist? Is Israeli democracy thriving or is it struggling?
Well,
in the wake of the threats against it?
I'm on the optimistic side. And I agree with most of the things said. I can see why optimism and pessimism can dwell together. And maybe before I'll say what I plan to say, I'll just a footnote to what Doug has said, because I think that Im Tirtzu and university students hold the key to the future, because the collision is going to be structural. The more there is a boycott of Israel, the spineless faculty will move to the left in order to publish in fashionable journals where you should be an anti-Zionist, more or less, in order to publish. And the more Israel is pressed with a boycott, the more the students who are the reservists who are fighting the wars will be angry at faculty who want to do this. A major candidate for the presidency of my university, Hebrew University, wanted the university senate to pass a decision that the university supports a Palestinian state. Luckily for him, no one listened. Had they listened, they would have had an intifada of the Jewish students. So structurally, and the optimism rests on the fact that this is the younger generation. And those who are holding the chokehold on Israeli democracy are all older than I. So they are the receivers of fat pensions from the military establishment. But my argument with Ruthie is, and that's the pessimistic side, technically Israel is not a democracy. What happens in Israel and in other places is that political science, the profession that Ran and I come from, history of political thought, has been overtaken by jurists who mumble invented concepts like essential incapacitation, like things that mean nothing, and they manage to blur and obfuscate the whole of the public discourse about the crucial issues of politics. But we are simpletons. We come from political science and political thought, and so we ask the basic question, not what is essential democracy. We ask who decides. We ask, where does sovereignty reside? And in Israel, ever since the Svirut, the reasonableness clause, has been struck down, the court now has usurped the authority to strike down constitutional legislation and constitutional amendments. This means that there is no action by the elected branches of government that the court cannot overrule. So if sovereignty is the authority of final decision over the political and judicial sphere, then the court holds final decision on everything. Sovereignty is now officially in the hands of 15 unelected judges who control the appointments of their colleagues. Why does that not make me a pessimist? Because this is so patently absurd that this cannot possibly survive. That and more. This is a radically leftist panel of woke judges. And they too are going to experience exactly what the faculty in my university is going to experience. They are protecting the rights of the Nukhba, of the terrorists, because their whole training is, how do we stop this monster of the tyranny of the majority? How do we protect those who are the minority? And so they are rallying to behind causes such as the proper diet for the terrorists of October 7. They are prosecuting someone for the murder. Imagine the term, the murder of a terrorist on the morning of October 7th. That's a murderer. Someone, imagine this, because in their worldview, if you capture the terrorist in the midst of the chaos of October 7th, then why don't you sit by him and guard him until the police comes? Because people are dying all around you. So this court has absolute authority with no responsibility. And this is fraying because we see the results of their irresponsible decision. And this is going to focus on one thing, in my opinion, it's the Commission of Inquiry. Because the left is fighting tooth and nail for a commission of inquiry appointed by the chief of the Supreme Court, who, by the way, appointed himself illegally. So this is not going to fly. This cannot survive. So, and here what Ruthie and Doug say resonates with me deeply. We have a very strong citizenry and also an instinctively democratic citizenry. Israelis don't like to be told what to do. And especially for Zionism, the idea that now we are masters of our own fate. It is the natural right of the Jewish people, says the Declaration of Independence, to be like all peoples, masters of their own fate in their own sovereign state. This is the heart of Zionism. A Supreme Court attempting to tear out the heart of Zionism is waking a beast that it will not be able to ride.
Thank you very much. And Ruthie, since your name was mentioned a couple of times there, I'm going to give you a chance to respond to what Gadi just said.
Okay, happily. So, Gadi, first of all, I totally agree with you. My issue is, what do we say? We spend all these years saying Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East. We're a flourishing democracy. So you tell me, maybe we can invent another word, because I have trouble writing in any column that I will write that Israel is not a democracy. I am willing to say, I'm willing to attack the courts, I'm willing to attack the deep state, whatever you want. But I am very uncomfortable about saying that because the enemy is listening, and I hated it when the left said it, and I'm just uncomfortable, that's all.
Okay, Ran. You talked about Israel taking the wrong turn, miscalculating. Perhaps we need a constitution after all?
Is this working?
I think it's working.
Yeah.
Okay. The EU has a constitution, the United States has a constitution. It's not a safeguard against power grab by the bureaucracy and the courts. Let me, it's as if we are arguing, but we are not really arguing. Because the question, and I think Gadi pointed to it correctly, is a question of institutional power. We have a great society, we have great grassroots movements, of course MT2 as a forerunner of that. And we have a semblance of democracy, and we also have a responsibility to present ourselves as a democracy, because we are, what happened is institutionally the power has been grabbed by unelected people, by unelected officials. So we vote, we have a legislator, we have a government, but they have lost their power. So it's as if we play a game of democracy, but so we need to explain this, because again, this happens all over, and it happened here first. Anyone who would have paid attention might have prevented that catastrophe. So I go back. This is the most important question, I think, because in the end, it's a question of power, sovereignty, power. Who gets to decide? Who gets to say what happens next? So, the university is a great example. We have great students, we have great grassroots movements, but the power resides completely in the institution, in the people who run the institution. So, when you clash, which is something we all wanted to avoid, it's a clash between the student body and the Senate, right? Or the education ministry or the Malag, right? The Council of Higher Education. But they don't care what the students say. They have zero interest in student opinions. They are not private. They are completely. Let's try to fire a professor. You won't get past the academic institution. You won't get past the bureaucracy, and in the end, you won't get past the courts. Someone will strike down that decision, unless he did something that they don't like, right? But not because he violated. I know he advocated for a boycott against Israel, which is the thing that happens. We pay the salaries of people who call to boycott Israel, so we wouldn't be able to pay the salary. So it's a question of power, and most specifically institutional power. This is what is at play. And I don't know how the students can retain power. This has to come from government, this has to come from the legislature, and that means that we are heading to a very real clash. Regardless of all of the optimist spirit of Israeli society. And last point, which shows you that, because now I want to say that we also have a problem, a societal problem. If you look, and this is an important observation, you look at the people that the left admires today. They do not admire their politicians. They admire Gali Barav Miar, right? You have posters. When they demonstrate, the posters are of Gali Barav Miara, of Ronen Bar, of Yitzhak Amit, Erzi Halevi, when he was the chief of staff. They admire, although this is a civil protest, which is of course perfectly allowed, and nothing but good words to say to people who take their political views to protest against something they don't like. They admire the unelected officials. They don't admire the people that they vote for. Why? Because they know that this is the real power in Israel today. So they want to give to back those unelected officials to carry out policies that they like. This shows you that there is a degradation also on the civil level of the debate. Thank you.
Thank you. Doug, we're running out of time, so your 2 cents, your 2 minutes worth, if you don't mind. And is this a problem of power, a separation of powers, if you like?
I think it's a problem of power. I think Ron's point is well taken. I think Ruthie's perspective is very well taken, and I share her concern because she's looking at it from almost like a Kiruv point of view, like as she goes around the world. Once you start labeling yourself as anti-democratic, you open the gates to others who are very happy to pile in. So there's democracy in a certain context, but I think Gadi and Ron have very well expressed the tremendous flaws of what we are dealing with. I worry that at some point we're going to come to a clash where the elected officials will say to the court, we're not going to follow that particular decision.
Thank you. Shai, you said we need to change, but you didn't really get a chance to say in which direction. How do we change?
Thank you. First of all, I think that we need to sink into despair and leave the country. Kidding. Just breaking the ice. Oh, sorry. ככה זה טוב? Good. The change is about, it's not just unelected officials, like clerks. We are talking about the very, very old elite who control the country. And in order to bring Israel to a democracy, we need to change the mindset of the society. And it all derives from a perception of being just a safe haven here in Israel. I mean, Herzl actually stipulated an expression called safe shelter. And if we just came here after 2,000 years of diaspora to be a safe shelter, then there is no actually goals, mission, or I would say destiny to fulfill. And once you always try to, being in a perpetual justification of your existence, so you always, Gadi, who is my teacher, actually wrote a book called Nayadim Nayachim in Hebrew, the globalists and the patriots in English. Good. So today, the hegemony of the leftists in Israel is about, it's not just in vain, just to control. Jabotinsky used to call it an illness of hegemony. It's not just that. Today, they have a purpose. They would like to eradicate the Jewish identity from the Jewish state. And this is all about, the main struggle here today is about eradication of the Jewish identity from the Jewish state. And that's the reason, that's their motivation to control the country. And they are very, very, very strong. Mr. Baratz and Mr. Taub, you have never known the pilots of Israel. I had the privilege to serve as a fighter pilot in Israel.
They kicked me out of pilot school.
Yeah. So, and not just that.
I know them. Yeah.
By the way, they have, you've talked about the grassroots movements here in Israel. It's not enough. We need to change the mindset. And the mindset, first and foremost, it's about developing self-confidence and then to deal with, I call it in Hebrew, toda'at yehud, an awareness of destiny. שומעים אותי? An awareness of destiny. That's the only way, because the left is always right. The left always wins because they are, they think they reflect the moral of the world. For example, Mr. Gantz, have you heard of him? He was the chief of staff. So he's very proud of endangering the Golani brigade in order to save or take care the enemy. So the monkeys of the right just say to him, Mr. Gantz, you are a very, very, very moral man, but we would like to exist here in Israel. But the ideas always wins the existential ambition. So we need to exchange the ambition and to, I would say, to pretend a new, more perception. לרדוף אויביי ולהשיגם ולא לשוב את קולתם. To persecute our enemy and not come back until we kill the enemy. And הקם להורגך, השכם להורגו. So we need an alternative moral perception in order to exchange this elite who control the judicial system, the executive, and the legislature.
Thank you, Shai. Yossi, as a strategic thinker, a successful entrepreneur, changing our mindset, what is your best recommendation?
So Israel is a democracy. It's a democracy with problems, like any other democracy in the world. Okay, each one has different problems. If I have to choose Israel problems versus, let's say, France, I rather have Israel. Okay, they have no future. We have a future for the simple reason, number of children. Okay, that changes everything. But it doesn't mean that there won't be any crisis. And I think the most important thing that needs to happen right now, and I don't know if it will happen, is for the Supreme Court to understand the limitation of its power. Because if it doesn't, the public will rebel against its power. And somebody said, I don't remember, there will be a day when the government will not obey. There will be a day when the people in the army will not obey also, okay? But not by not serving, because most people will, but not obeying the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court is playing with fire, and I think the Supreme Court would be smart to tone itself down, okay, as part. I mean, I can talk about other power elites in the government, other elite centers of power, but this session is just about the Supreme Court, not about others. I mean, we can talk for hours about other power centers. Whatever the Supreme Court will not limit itself, the reaction from the other side will be harsher and stronger and not necessarily healthy.
Okay. Gadi, so before Aylanna sums up, if you look at what everybody said here today, based on that, how do you see Israel moving forward?
I think Ran's point is well taken, that what they did is they locked the institutional channels for change. And what Yossi said last is that at some point there will be disobedience is also true. So again, I'll start with the university and go back to the court. Ran is right that the faculty don't care. They don't care. Until students will stop coming to the universities. This is happening in the United States. Until donors would stop donating to the universities. So there will be at some point outside pressure. As for the Supreme Court, there could be disobedience or there could be shrugging. At one point, in my opinion, at some point there would be a Wizard of Oz moment, don't look at the man behind the curtain. And this could have been now. I don't think they will do it now in the middle of a war. But with the absurdity of the postponement of the dismissal of the head of Shin Bet, clearly they have no business doing that. And if they force the government, the cabinet can say, okay, we don't invite you to government meetings anymore. You could be there. You could be the Supreme Court's head of Shin Bet. We are speaking with some other person. And I'm not sure how this can work out and what will happen, but eventually this thing will fray, because once you separate authority from accountability to such an extent, at some point this system will break down because it's an upside down pyramid. How will it happen with the general citizens? Look, there was a Supreme Court appeal against the authority of Benjamin Netanyahu to construct a coalition after he won the election, because he has indictments hanging over his head. According to the law, the Supreme Court had no business debating that, because there is a basic law saying that a prime minister can serve under indictments. In fact, it can serve until final conviction on the last level of appeal. Why did they let him? But they invented some, abracadabra by which they said they have the authority to remove him, but they did not. I interviewed the former Minister of Justice, also one of the greatest scholars of Israeli jurisprudence, Professor Daniel Friedman, and he said, why do you think they decided unanimously to let Netanyahu construct his coalition? Because if they had not, the next election would have been about the authority of the Supreme Court. They would have met the full fury of the majority that elected Netanyahu. So they hardly make any of these calculations except at the edge of the precipice. So at one point, this will fail them. Aaron Barak knew how to avoid these things. He was a tactician. But these people with their hubris, they just don't care. And in the end, this will come back to bite them. I don't know how, but in the end, you cannot rule a society without legitimacy. Even Stalin understood this, and Stalin made such efforts to create legitimacy for himself. And in the end, this collapsed too, because you always need legitimacy, and they're bleeding legitimacy now by the day. The Supreme Court, the public confidence in the Supreme Court went from 90% 35 years ago to be under 40% now. And this is still falling. So this invented form of government just has no future. So Ruthie, just to conclude with, should we or should we not say this is not democracy? I think we should be honest and we should just say what we see if we want people to believe us. And secondly, I wish we had more Dan Shiftans, you know? It's just double down. When they blame you with something, when they take us to the hypocritical court at The Hague, we should tell them next time there will be a nuclear bomb. Watch us. Because then they will stop. This is the thing with the woke. When you start apologizing, they know they have the lever. You should convince them that you are crazy and not to be messed with.
Well, we ended with a bombshell. Aylanna Maisel is now going to sum up.
There it is.
Am
now.
I on? I'm
Yeah.
on. Okay. Thank you so much for.
But closer.
Thank you so much for leading me to sum up with that as the final sentence. Okay. Well, I'm keenly aware that I'm the last thing between you and lunch, so let me try to do justice to everybody, albeit not enough because we only have a couple of minutes. So it seems clear that the entire panel agrees that we are coming towards some sort of imminent clash between, certainly within the parts of government that have been clashing, but potentially within Israeli society as well. And I didn't quite hear what the concrete solutions to that may be. It sounds like there's a consensus that the only way out is through, whatever form that really takes. But there is also consensus that there is a growing public awareness of certainly the problems we're facing. I reiterate what I said at the beginning, which is that I don't believe that we have positive enough framing and language for what we're actually fighting for rather than against, and that where we're heading needs to be framed in terms of Jewish sovereignty, individual liberty, rule of law, all of these things that the right has sort of felt, with the exception of the sovereignty question, has worked against it. There was an issue of the institutions that are being used and sort of weaponized against parts of the Israeli public, not simply in the legal bureaucracy, but within academia and other key sectors. And there was the suggestion by Gadi that, and I think also Ron may have mentioned, that one of the ways in which their power might be lessened is if people simply stop participating in the game, whether it's financially or otherwise. Shai spoke about a change in awareness that is necessary to bring about real reform here. He talked about the fact that we need to understand the roots of the conflict, which go back well beyond the founding of the state itself. I would argue they actually go back thousands of years, but he stopped at 1904. He talked about the need for the right to have confidence in its way forward and an awareness of destiny. And I think I'm going to conclude not with a nuclear bomb, but with the idea that, as Doug suggested and as many other speakers signed on to, we still need to be optimistic. We live here together. This is the Jewish state. The Jewish state is a miracle. The Jewish people are a miracle. And in fact, the citizenry is full of amazing people. I will say also right-wing, but center-left and more broadly. And it is with them that we will forge the destiny that we are heading toward. Thank you very much for your time here. Thanks to panelists. And have a wonderful
Let's
time at
give
the conference.
Mordechai HaYehudi the last word. Salvation for the Jews will come from somewhere.
Thank you. From the left.